I'm Sarah Hashim-Waris in the Los Angeles Times newsroom. Federal investigators are looking at a number of factors to determine the cause of Saturday's crash of Asiana Airlines Flight 214 at San Francisco International Airport. Their probe includes a deeper look at the jetliner's 4 pilots, its flight data recorders, its cockpit voice recorder, and more. National Transportation Safety Board Chairwoman Deborah Hersman and several first responders held separate news conferences today to address some key points about the continuing investigation. Joining me now is Times staff writer Victoria Kim. Victoria, thanks for being here. I know you're covering this.
Hi, good afternoon.
So I'd like to start off with a clip from a press conference by the NTSB earlier today where the chairwoman spoke about the pilots on the plane. So let's roll that clip.
We are working to interview all 4 pilots that were on the aircraft coming into San Francisco. There were 2 pilots, and many of you all have talked about those 2 pilots. It was a captain who was working on his initial operating experience in the 777. He was an experienced pilot and a prior captain, but he was working on getting his rating on the 777 and getting initial operating experience in the 777.
What else do we know about the pilots?
Well, we know that the main pilot, the captain, was a veteran pilot who had about close to 10,000 hours of flight time, but he was relatively new to the Boeing 777. He had about 43 hours on the 777, and this was his first landing into San Francisco. His co-pilot was a training officer who was training him on the 777, and he was an even more experienced pilot who had about 12,000 hours of flight time. And these pilots will be investigated thoroughly in the coming days. They will be interviewed today, and the investigation will go into anything from what they did in the days leading up to the flight, how much rest they got, any medications they may have been on, their health conditions, all of that.
Now, in addition to investigating the pilots, they're also going to be looking at voice recorders, data recorders. The go-around call is something that initially there was some misunderstanding about. Can you explain what exactly a go-around call is and how it sort of played out in this scenario?
In some reports yesterday, there was some confusion about whether it was air traffic control who had instructed these pilots to try to take off again and circle once more before attempting another landing. The NTSB chairwoman cleared that up today and said it was actually a conversation among the pilots that was recorded, and it was the pilots themselves. It was their call to see if they can take off once more. And this happened about 1.5 seconds before impact, and this was when they increased the speed to try to take off once more, but obviously it was too late at that point. And something that she discussed today was the approach speed, and this is a key part of the investigation, that they were approaching at a speed that is significantly lower than the target approach speed that is safe for landing. The target speed is 137 knots. She said today at one point it was as low as 103 knots.
And in terms of the people that were injured during this terrible incident, I think there was 182 people who were injured, 2 who are paralyzed due to spinal cord injuries, 2 teenage girls from China who were headed to a church-run camp were the 2 sole fatalities. And I'd like to run a clip from Assistant Deputy Chief with the San Francisco Fire Department, Dale Carnes, and here's what he had to say earlier today on that.
Approximately half to 2/3 of the way through the incident, as we were transitioning from the fire attack and rescue phase into both overhauling the fire and the aircraft and starting to concentrate on the treatment and transport of patients, it became aware to one of our fire attack battalion chiefs that there was a possibility that one of our 2 fatalities might have been contacted by one of our apparatus at an unknown point during the incident.
What we know is that the 2 girls were found on the runway about a mile apart. One of them had been ejected fairly far, and the other one was found closer to the wreckage, and that was the one that they are now suspecting may have been somehow run over by an emergency vehicle. It still remains to see what the final cause of death will be, but that's up to the coroner to determine.
And the coroner's report is still not
Still pending.
Got it. Okay. One of the last people on the plane was a flight attendant, and she kind of had an interesting tale to tell about her last few minutes on the plane. What happened?
Well, this is a 40-year-old woman who's a veteran flight attendant. She's been with Asiana for 18 years. And she described to reporters what those last few moments were like in the plane, and her description was incredibly vivid and incredibly harrowing. She described how two of the evacuation slides inflated inwards into the cabin as opposed to outward as they are supposed to. They are still investigating what the cause of this might have been, but those two slides ended up pinning two stewardesses, and she was describing how one of them, a colleague of hers, was asking her to save her life, and she said one of the four pilots went into the cockpit, came rushing out with an axe, and hacked at this slide to save the flight attendant. And she described how it seemed like the top of the aircraft was falling in, that there was ashes everywhere, and that there was black smoke in the back of the plane. It was almost like a wall, and she couldn't see towards the end of the plane. But she said she evacuated all the passengers out through the left of the plane, where the chutes were actually working, and that she believed she was the last to leave. But it turned out later that I think emergency personnel rescued one additional passenger who was in that smoke in the back of the plane.
Wow, that certainly is quite a tale. Well, thank you for your insights, Victoria. You can be sure to keep up with our ongoing coverage on the San Francisco plane crash on LATimes.com, as well as on Twitter @LATimes.